All right, good afternoon, grade sevens. I hope that you guys are all doing well and that you've had a productive week so far. Grade sevens, we're back again, guys. And I want us to continue on a topic that we started last week after one of the students requested that we go through this section. It's been a section that we've been working towards for quite some time now, so it actually works out just fine that we're going to be discussing this. In our session last week, grade sevens, we started talking about the topic or the chapter of algebra, right? This is that topic that seems super intimidating, quite confusing at first. And we want to now take a second lesson to dive into a little bit more depth in this topic of algebra. So, we spent some time last week chatting about the very basics, right? Trying to understand what exactly um, is included in this topic of algebra and what it actually is, right? We talk about this topic called algebra, but what is algebra? And a lot of people will automatically think about these letters that we use in algebra called variables. They think about x and y and how these variables, these letters that we have, can be any number we want, which is not completely true. So we started by debunking a few of these misunderstandings, and then we started talking about where the topic of algebra comes from. Now, I explained to you guys last week that algebra is essentially the more grown up version of missing number problems, right? Throughout grade four, grade five, and grade six, we've learned to deal with missing number problems in different ways, right? We use shapes or symbols to represent these numbers that we need to figure out. And it's kind of like a little puzzle, right? We need to figure out what number this picture or symbol or shape needs to be in order for what I'm saying in a math sentence to be true, right? So algebra is now a little bit more of a complicated version of this, not because it's very hard, but because when we work with these missing number problems, the questions themselves can get a little bit more tricky over time, right? Let's say we are trying to figure out how much weight a steel rope on a crane can hold, right? These cranes lift massive slabs of concrete to help build on construction sites. Maybe I'm looking for the amount of weight that these uh, cables can carry, for example, right? That's definitely not the kind of problem that we would solve using shapes and symbols. So instead, what we use are these letters called variables. All right. Now, we looked at one or two examples where I showed you guys how the missing number problems that we've seen in the past are actually pretty much the same thing as these equations that we find in algebra, right? These letters, just in the way that those symbols or shapes represent a value, a number that we need to find, the letters or variables that we use in algebra do exactly the same thing. Okay, now let me just remind you guys of something. If we have the letter X in a question, it is not true that X can be any number, right? Um, that is not true. It's going to depend on the information that we have in our question. Okay, so if I told you X was the weight of a person. It's not possible for X to be 1,000 kilograms, right? No human has ever weighed that much. So that's an example of where we can see that these letters cannot be any number we want them to be. They have to be a specific number that we find based on the information that we are given. All right. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen with you guys. And the goal for today's lesson, guys, is to go through some of the important words that we use in this topic of algebra, right? When we talk about terms and coefficients and exponents, what do all of these words mean and how do they relate to the work that we see in front of us when we are working with a question inside of the topic of algebra? That's our goal for today. Okay, we want to understand all of the important words that we use because if we don't understand this, if we go further into the topic of algebra, it's going to be very difficult for us to understand what's going on without an understanding of these words. Okay, so the heading for today is going to be algebra terminology basics. Terminology basics. Okay, today's date is the 17th of June. If you guys want to write down the date as well, it's up to you guys what notes you decide to write down, but I would strongly suggest that you do take notes. Right, so let me give you guys something that looks really complicated. Okay, let's say I have x squared plus 3y plus 40 or minus 14. Okay, this looks super complicated, and we're not going to worry about finding the value of X and Y just yet. You guys are going to learn a lot about this next year in grade 8. But when we look at this, grade 7s, we need to understand what the word coefficient means, what the word constant means, what the word variable means, right? So there are all of these different terms that we use when discussing um, work in the chapter of algebra that we need to understand. So let's go ahead. What I want you guys to please do for me is write this in the middle of your page towards the top, but please leave a little bit of space around it so that we can write notes. Okay, write it towards the top of your page. And let's start by discussing the most important word out of all of the words that we're going to be discussing today. What is a variable, grade 7? So a variable is a letter used to represent a letter used as a placeholder to represent an unknown value. Right? Why is it unknown? Because it's a missing number problem, grade 7s. We're going to have to find the value later on as we progress through the topic of algebra. Okay, but it's a letter used as a placeholder to represent an unknown value. Now, when it comes to variables, the most common letters that we use in maths are going to be A, B, C, F, X, Y, um, W, X, Y, Z. Okay. These are the most common letters that we use when we talk about variables. Now, if you guys do have some kind of color, you can either highlight or underline, but where in this expression that we have at the top of the screen over here, do we find our variables? Where are our variables? Well, we have an X over here, and we have a Y over here in the middle. Please pay attention to how I am not highlighting the entire x squared. Right? I'm not doing the entire x squared. I am not doing the entire 3y either. Right over here, I have only highlighted the letters. These other pieces have got different names. Okay. The x and the y are considered our variables. So you can imagine them as being shapes, right? A square and a rectangle. So keep in mind that there are a few letters, grade sevens, that we use very often, but we can use any letter between A and Z. If we want to use H or G or even M, the L, all of these letters can be used as variables, but we usually stick to the ones that I've written in the list over here at the top. Okay, these over here are the most common letters, so you can write these in brackets if you would like to. A, B, C, F, W, X, Y, and Z. Now, a lot of students ask me why in the world we write our X's like that. Why does algebra have a curved X? Why is it not just a normal X? Guys, because of a multiplication sign. Okay. If, for example, I have x squared times x to the power of 3, if I wrote this down with the same kind of x, this would be an absolute mess. Okay. This is unreadable, and there's no way for us to distinguish between the letter x, right, the variable, which represents an unknown value, and the multiplication signs. So that's why we have a curved x like that. Okay. Right, so that's the first word we need to understand, a variable. Let's move on to word number 2. We need to understand what a coefficient is. Coefficient. Right. Now, when we look at the word coefficient, it's sometimes written with a hyphen in between. Okay. This line over here. And the word co that we see in front, grade 7, gives us a hint as to what the word coefficient means. Coefficient refers to the value that is being multiplied to a variable. So it is the number directly in front, directly in front of a variable which is being multiplied by that variable. So that sounds like a lot of confusing terminology, but what does it mean? It's the number that we see directly in front of our variable. So, for example, the number 3 over here is written in front of the y, 3y. That number 3 that we see is what we call a coefficient. But what about the letter x over here? What coefficient does x? Well, when you cannot see a number in front of a variable, it means that we have an imaginary 1 in front of that. Okay? So there is one of these x squareds. So this is the variable of x squared. This is the variable of, sorry, the coefficient, guys, of x squared and the coefficient of y. You must please remember, if no coefficients can be seen, it is the number 1. It is the number 1. And there's something else that's very important to remember. The coefficient of a variable tells us how many of that variable there is. Okay. Please make sure you're writing down notes, grade sevens. If you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask. I don't expect you guys to understand everything first time around. Right, so I'm going to give you guys a second to copy very quickly. Right, so now we know what the variables and coefficients in this expression are. The next thing we want to talk about is what we call exponents, grade sevens. And we've had a few lessons on this already this year. We know that exponents are also called powers. Okay. Exponents are powers. Right. So, what are our exponents or powers, grade sevens? These are the small values that we find to the top right of a value or a variable, right? So if we go up just very quickly to look at this expression that we started on, we can see that right over here is a little 2, right? This is an exponent. But then what is the exponent for our 3y? What is our exponent here? Well, when we see an exponent on a variable grade sevens, we are allowed to and must always assume that it is the value 1, not -1, just 1. Right? That's why I'm drawing the 1 in dotted lines over there. So we have two exponents. Okay. And please remember, what are exponents, grade sevens? In other words, what do exponents tell us? Exponents tell us how many times a value has been multiplied by itself. Okay, that's very important, guys, and that's something we discussed in our exponents lessons that we had earlier this year. Please remember, guys, that you are going to use this a lot next year. So, this is really preparation for your first year in high school. And so, I think that that's more than enough reason to take this section of work very seriously. All right. Right. The next word that we want to discuss, grade sevens, is the word constants. What is a constant in the context of an algebraic equation or expression? I'm going to give you guys 1 or 2 minutes to finish copying, and then I'm going to move on. You've got 2 minutes, guys. Please copy whatever you want off of the screen. I would strongly suggest you write down as much as possible. Okay, guys, please remember that if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to ask. I'd love to answer any questions that you guys have. So far, grade sevens, we understand what a variable is, what a coefficient is, and what an exponent is, and also where we go about finding these different elements when we are looking at examples of algebraic sentences. Now, as you can see on the screen, the next thing that we need to know about is what we call our constants. So, what exactly is a constant in algebra? Right. Let's move on to this next section. If you guys need me to move back up so that you can copy, please let me know. So, what are these constants that we're busy talking about? A constant is any numerical value that does not change. Okay? Constants can be whole numbers, decimals, or even fractions. So all constants are lone standing numbers, grade six, grade sevens, excuse me, guys. So again, if we go back up to the top over here, where would we find an example of a constant? Well, our constant is going to be the value 14 over here at the end. Why? Because it's a whole number, guys, and it doesn't matter what I do. 14 is always going to be 14. Okay, its value doesn't depend on anything else, and its value is not going to change during the course of our calculations. Constants are any numerical value that does not change. Okay, so if I go back up to the top over here, guys, let's quickly go ahead and just label what we've done. We know that our orange, the numbers that we find in front of our variables are what we call coefficients, right? The one that we see over here is specifically called the coefficient of x squared. Why? Because this one is attached to our x squared. So looking at the 3 over here, this is specifically the coefficient of y. It's the coefficient of the letter y. We know that the yellow represents our variables. This 2 over here, we know is called an exponent or a power. Right? Sorry, guys. I just want to make a little bit more space very quickly. Right. So this 2 that we have over here is the exponent, but we have more than one exponent, grade 7, so we need to be specific. It's the exponent of x. And the 1 that we see over here is the exponent of y. And that is very important, guys. You need to be able to identify the exponents that belong to each of the different variables that we run into. And finally, we have the number 14 over here in blue, which is just a simple old whole number. And because it is a value that remains constant and does not change, we call it exactly that, a constant. Okay, I'm going to give you guys another opportunity to copy very quickly. You've got 2 or 3 minutes to quickly go ahead and copy. I'll give you guys 1 more minute to quickly copy, and then we're going to move on. Right, guys, I haven't seen any questions just yet. So if there is anything on your mind, please make sure that you ask. Right. So there's one last thing that we need to talk about now that we know all of this, grade sevens. And when we look at this example that we've just written down, we're going to write it down again over here at the bottom under the notes that we've just gone and written. So this is the math sentence that we had right above at the top of all of our notes. Now, there's one last thing, like I said, that we need to understand, and this is the idea of terms. So, if I end up working with some really complicated equations one day, and I find that there really is a lot going on, I need to be able to distinguish between all of the separate parts, right? So looking at something like this over here, this looks super complicated and it's definitely very busy, but we can see that something's happening over here, something else is happening over here, another thing over there, and one last thing happening over here. Now, each of these individual parts that we can identify, guys, are what we call terms, right? And this is a really important concept because we have to be able to decide what we can move around, what we can add together, what we can subtract from something else, and so on and so forth, right? So, looking at this expression that we have over here at the top, we're going to use some slightly different colors this time around. Over here, we have a group of something. Then we have another group of something next to that. And finally, something sitting on its lonesome right at the end. Each of these little pieces is what we call a term, grade sevens. And a term is a collection of all the things that we spoke about in the notes above this section. Okay, so over here, we have what we would call term one. Next, we would have term two. And finally, over here, right at the end, we would have what we call term three. They're not necessarily always labeled like this, but what you do need to understand is that if I look at this math sentence, I must be able to tell my teacher that I have a total of three terms, right? I don't need to label them individually, but I have to be able to count these separate groups of information. So, what are these terms that we've been talking about? Let's write down some information about them. What are terms? Terms are collections of variables, coefficients, exponents, or constants that are separated from other groups in an algebraic sentence. Okay, it's not called an algebraic sentence, it's called an algebraic expression. Okay, but in brackets, you can just write the word sentence, just so that you guys remember what that means for now. You'll dive into a lot more detail around this next year. So I know what these terms are now, right? I know that a term is a collection of variables, coefficients, exponents, or constants that is separated from other groups or collections in an algebraic expression. How do I go about finding these terms, right? How did I know that we have three separate terms in this specific example? Terms are separated from other terms by addition or subtraction symbols. Right. So, looking at the example that we have on the top of the screen at the moment, guys, we can see that we have a plus and a minus sign, which is helping us distinguish between the different terms that we have in this algebraic sentence, which we call an expression. So we really have to go about practicing how many terms we have in different expressions. And knowing that it's plus and minus signs that separates these terms makes it quite easy for us. Right, so at the bottom of the screen now, I've written down something that looks pretty intimidating, right? There's lots of letters and all kinds of symbols and fractions and whole numbers and variables. It's a collection of everything that we've discussed today. So, if I asked you how many terms there are in the following expression, guys, what would our answer be? Our biggest indicator is going to be our operator symbols, right? Our plus and minus symbols specifically. So we can see we have one term over here, a second over here, a third over here, and finally a fourth term right at the end. And we don't need to go into so much detail about worrying about all of the brackets and the exponents and the fractions, right? As we practice this more and more, yes, you guys will be given some more tricky examples, which is going to teach you about some of the exceptions or sort of just trickier examples that you should be aware of. But in an example like this, grade sevens, it's clear to us that we have a collection of four terms in this expression. Okay. we have 4 terms. So, guys, there is so much work that we still need to learn about algebra, and you guys can trust me when I say that you are going to learn about more than enough of it in your first year of high school in grade 8. Okay. But we really need to practice understanding all of the different words that I've used today in this class, because when we step foot into our new maths classes next year in grade 8, your teacher is hopefully going to help you guys revise, and she'll remind you of some of these things, or he will remind you. But the better we understand this now, the easier all of this is going to be to understand next year. Okay. And these really are the fundamentals, grade sevens. So quickly copy down whatever it is you have not yet had a chance to write down about terms. Okay. And guys, again, there aren't any specific questions, and that's okay. I hope that what I have explained today makes some decent sense to you guys. Remember, guys, there are a lot of tricky examples that we can spend time going through later on. But for now, what we really need to focus on is practicing identifying all of these different parts of an algebraic expression, right? So, guys, what I'm going to do is quickly share a different screen, my iRainbow, and I'm going to show you guys where to find all of this work on algebra and what you can maybe go and take a look at now that we've discussed all of last week's work and this week's work. Okay. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to quickly finish copying, and then I'm going to change my screen. All right. So, guys, let's quickly go ahead and take a look at iRainbow. And if you guys need me to come back to the screen, you're just going to have to let me know. All right. I am going to stop sharing that screen and instead show you something different. Right. So, grade sevens, when you guys open up iRainbow, you're going to maybe need a little bit of uh, a heads up as to where you need to look for this section and the quizzes that we can use to practice what we've discussed this week and last week. So when we open up our rainbow, please make sure yours is up to date. We're going to go into this chapter over here, the island of patterns, functions, and algebra. We're then going to move across to algebraic expressions, important basics. Okay. Once we click on this, you are going to see a lot of different quizzes pop up, and there's a lot that we can test ourselves on. But for now, grade sevens, I would strongly recommend that you guys go into the left-hand corner to the fourth quiz, which is called Terms and Coefficients. Okay, we're going to click on Terms and Coefficients, and we're obviously greeted with three levels like we are with any other topic. And if we click on level one, please keep in mind, guys, I have done this quiz before, but question one asks us, how many terms are there in this expression? Well, the number six is a term, and then we have a plus sign, which helps to separate a second term, right? The letter M uh, is also its own term. So 6 and M gives us a total of two terms. So we can put that in and then move on to example number two. This question asks us how many terms are in this expression. Yes, you can see that the answer is 3, but why is that the case? Because we have two plus signs over here, grade 7s, which tells us that we are separating three different groups or collections of information. The one is its own piece of information. 6D is the second collection of information, and 8D is the third. So that is why we have a total of three expressions. Now, I think that it would be really beneficial for you guys to go ahead and try this quiz and keep your notes nearby for reference. Okay. If you feel comfortable with this and you can get 5 out of 5 stars, go ahead and try level two and test yourself a little bit more. Grade sevens, we need to please keep in mind that we have a lot of students from many different schools. And that means that some of you might be a little further ahead in this section in comparison to other students. And that's completely fine. Everyone is working on their own schedule for the most part. But the point of me saying that is, if there are other topics that you recognize here that you want to go and just take a look through and explore, you are more than welcome to, guys. Okay, please, you don't have to stick to the quizzes that I recommend. These are just the quizzes that we can try given the information that we've done in a specific lesson. Okay, so guys, go ahead and have a little adventure of your own. Go on a little side quest and explore all of the different quizzes. I hope that what we've discussed in today's lesson has given you a little bit more of an understanding of the section of algebra, right? Like I've said, guys, there's going to be a lot to understand, but if what I've explained today makes sense for the most part, then you are in good stead. Okay, you don't have to understand everything word for word. You will get used to it as the words are used more often in class, but it's a starting point. Okay, it's an introduction. So, grade sevens, I hope that you found today's lesson useful and that there was something valuable that you could take away from it. Please keep in mind, number one, that our next lesson is going to be again next week, Tuesday, from quarter to 5 to quarter to 6 in the afternoon/evening. And you have access to recordings of all of the lessons that we've had this year, which I believe is 22 lessons. That is a lot of information that you guys can use to your advantage, whether it's for revision, for studying, or just to try and understand something that doesn't make perfect sense in class. All right. But guys, that's going to be it for today. I wish you the best for the week ahead. If you have any tests or exams, I hope that you guys crush it. But guys, I will speak to you all again next week. All right. Thank you so much, grade sixes. Have a fantastic evening, guys. Or grade sevens. Apologies, guys. Grade sevens, I hope you guys have a fantastic evening ahead. All right. I'll chat to you all next week. Thank you, guys.